Elon Musk tweeting his intentions to take the company private, causing the stock to spike dramatically before being halted late in yesterday's trading session for more than an hour. Questions over the legality of the tweet are still being asked today, but the board released a statement this morning saying that Elon opened a discussion into the matter last week. Mike, we talked with you about this quite a bit yesterday, but Stephen, we haven't taken your temperature. Safe to say we've never actually really seen anything like this.
No, we haven't, but we've been building up to it. Our tweeter-in-chief has proved that this little service that started out with little blips to say where you are can do international policy, and now it can move markets in a very big way. And Elon Musk is actually right behind the president in using Twitter to cause a lot of trouble.
Right. Is it trouble?
What
he did yesterday, is that trouble?
I think it is. I think it's trouble when you post something of a few words and it means hundreds of millions of dollars to your net worth. That's not a great thing.
Stephen, you've talked to Elon Musk several times, as well as many innovators going back in Silicon Valley. I often wonder what it would have been like if Steve Jobs had been on Twitter during the stock option backdating scandal, or his rants against Adobe, the surpassing Dell in market cap, that kind of thing. What do you think Elon Musk's mindset is here? Is he thinking about the broader reaction to these tweets, the impact perhaps on the doubters, or is he just venting?
I can't imagine that Steve Jobs would ever do that kind of tweet. I remember him during the option days, and what he did was he had very careful discussions off the record with a few reporters to get his point of view across, and no big public statements there. Everything was very carefully choreographed. Twitter exposes your personality. So if you have a big personality that likes to make a lot of waves, Twitter is an amazing amplifier for that. And I think we've seen that just in the past few weeks. Elon has really ramped up his Twitter activity, and it's gotten him into trouble in a couple of cases. I think there's a lawsuit about something he said about the Thai rescue there. And I think this is of a piece with that. He's sort of just using that to express his mind, though I can't imagine that he didn't have some sort of sense of what would happen when he posted this tweet.
Right. Yeah, you're right. You're right about that. In terms of the words funding security, the board today, the discussion with Elon included a discussion on how being private could better serve long-term interests and address the funding for this to occur. What could that possibly mean?
Well, it could possibly mean
letter of intent. Handshake?
You would have thought that it would have been detailed in the blog post that Musk followed up with, right? So I think that's where you're left with that it looks like a little bit of an impulsive statement, a little bit of over-promising, and certainly up for interpretation by regulators and anybody else as to whether, in fact, that crossed some kind of a line. But yes, in the old days, in the 80s, they had a highly confident letter from one banker that said, we think we can raise the money for this deal, go right ahead, and somehow that served as the coin of the realm. We have nothing like that right here. So it's really an odd story, because on the one hand, you have to go down the track that says, this is a CEO of a public company making a public statement with all the protocols and constraints and regulations around that. Maybe it's a real process that's underway. Maybe we have to consider how it might happen structure-wise and in terms of billions being raised. On the other hand, it could have just been a gut level, other way of stating his intent to not be in the public eye and to essentially not be, at the mercy at some level of the, psychologically at least, of the short sellers.
Overpromise, impulsive, two adjectives I'm sure have been used to describe Elon Musk before. But I mean, this is also a man who is reinventing rocket science, right? He's just built really the first pure play electric car company, reimagining energy storage. Is there really a scenario in which he would be so flippant as to essentially, I don't know what the word is, break the law on Twitter?
Well, you're right in tying in his accomplishments in his companies to this behavior. What he's able to do in those companies to revolutionize space travel, to change the way we think of transportation, it means that he takes a non-traditional view towards the tools at hand, and I think he's doing that with Twitter.
To some degree, some of these inventors, these visionaries, can get the sense that the rules don't apply to them, right? That was the criticism of Bill Gates during the Microsoft antitrust trial, that he really should have thought about, okay, maybe you don't need to fight this all the way through. Maybe there are laws of gravity that apply even to Microsoft, on through Steve Jobs, so many others who have been thought to maybe get in over their skis because they've been so right about actual technical things.
Well, right now we're arguing whether the rules do apply. You know, he's helping us redefine it. There was that ruling that allowed tweets to be part of the normal process there. So maybe he's just ahead of the game in defining what's the new game.
But if tweets are okay as a public disclosure for a corporate executive, that also means that the threshold for it being true is there too when you're making a material statement. So I do think that's one way, interestingly, where there are more constraints on a CEO than there are on the president in this respect. So, and John, to your point about those other entrepreneurs, no doubt about it, you could probably list 5 more who felt like, look, why don't people just kind of buy into my long-term vision, go along for the ride with me? The difference here is that he is to some degree at the mercy of the capital markets, and he needs more capital, and he will for a while, as far as anybody can tell. So that's different, right? Jobs, Apple never raised money after the IPO. You know, Gates, Microsoft never needed any more capital. So that's a little bit where it gets tricky here for him.
And it's interesting to watch the sell side basically be flailing today. JP Morgan, as surprising as these developments are, they're nevertheless declarative statements from the CEO of a public company. Therefore, we're incorporating into our valuation the real possibility of equity taken out at 4 times.
And I think you have to do that. You have to assign some probability that he puts this together and makes it work through some kind of strategic long-term investors, something like that. At least assign a probability to it. But the other thing about how the stock is traded, let's keep in mind, this stock more than a year ago traded above 380 with no talk of this, with no deal talk. It can go anywhere it wants based on the ebb and flow of positioning and sentiment and expectations for what production is going to be in a couple of years.
Right. One other element, you mentioned the short sellers. Can you imagine him not having a little bit of satisfaction today to think of the impact this had on his foes, the short sellers?
I think 20% since the Einhorn shorts were delivered.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because you would think he could declare victory on some level.
Right.
And another thing, it's not a CEO looking at a company that can say, wow, my company's too cheap. Nobody's appreciating this asset. I'm going to buy it for myself because I can make a great return on it. It's strictly the shorts. If you believe the street's expectation of cash flow for 2019, it's at 22 times cash flow. It's really expensive. So it's all about being outside of this pressure, perceived pressure from the shorts.